positives of it, and one of the negatives is working with family.
The best part of my business is working with my family. The worst part is working with my family.
Rick Harrison has finally revealed the truth he spent years hiding from the cameras. Behind the friendly banter and the family business fans thought they were watching.
I mean, so when Pawn Stars, our very first episode, we were had the highest ratings of any show, any premiere ever on the History Channel.
Pawn Stars was quietly falling apart, with a lawsuit from his own mother, a set that wasn't what it looked like, and a family lineup that had already lost more than one of its own.
It's definitely an old case.
It is. So, this is a 1941 Gibson SJ200.
So what was Rick Harrison really protecting all this time? And why is the show returning without the one Harrison who grew up behind that counter? Join us as we reveal the real reason Pawn Stars ended, straight from Rick Harrison himself. The contract nobody renewed. Fans had long believed Pawn Stars was too successful to end. Interestingly, Season 23 ended in 2024 with no announcement. Rick Harrison described that moment as simply waiting to see what would come next, a phrase that covered up just how uncertain the franchise's future really was behind the scenes. Details of the show's cancellation didn't come out until February 2025, when Rick told reporters bluntly that the show was no longer under contract with History and that the shooting schedule had gone on indefinite hiatus with no plans to resume. By then, the show had produced about 700 episodes over 25 seasons, broadcast in 150 countries, and translated into 38 languages, numbers that made the silence about its future even harder for longtime viewers to reconcile. What looked like a quiet fade was actually a business decision taking place in real time, on a foundation that had been cracking for years in ways that the cameras never showed. For a start, the building fans watched every week wasn't the real gold and silver pawn shop. The real store was too small to shoot in without shutting down the business altogether.
How you doing?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you?
Pretty good. What do you have here?
I have a set of rare, unproduced Care Bear cousins from Kenner.
So the producers built a larger replica set to accommodate the camera crew, lighting equipment, and the ever-growing number of tourists who turned up after the show became a hit. That meant the background customers browsing the shelves in almost every episode were unpaid extras, not actual shoppers, and the sellers bringing in rare coins, guns, and artifacts were pre-screened before they ever stepped in front of a camera. Sometimes items were bought from antique dealers or private collectors, and not just walked in off the street either.
$4,000, I think, is a really reasonable price for these things right here.
I appreciate that. I'll take it.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Negotiations that seemed spontaneous were often reshot for lighting or timing. There was never an official scandal, but by the time its contract expired, it had quietly reframed what the show was, a highly managed production masquerading as an unscripted family business, running on a set custom-built to sustain its own popularity. When the ratings were good, the gap between image and reality mattered less, but it left the franchise with very little real ground to stand on once the network began to ask tougher questions about its future.
Hello, how can I help you?
Hi. Looking to see if maybe you'd be interested in purchasing this sword.
Oh, wow.
Are you a closet samurai or something like that?
No.
And the questions of who was really in control of that future and who would profit from it had already blown up into a lawsuit years ago that the show never once acknowledged on screen. Cast controversies that quietly eroded the show. Rick Harrison was sued by his own mother, Joanne Harrison, in February of 2022 in a dispute that went back more than 2 decades. The lawsuit said that Joanne Harrison signed over her ownership stake in the family business around 2000, when she was recovering from a medical coma, and that her late husband reportedly urged her to accept the decision at the time. The gold and silver pawn shop was originally founded in 1981 by Joanne Harrison and her husband, Richard Harrison, together, with Joanne Harrison holding the larger ownership stake of the two, about 51%, versus Richard's 49%. Joanne and Richard were married for 58 years, and court filings said she was not a background figure, but someone who helped lay the actual groundwork that eventually became the show. Her stakes reportedly extended across the pawn shop itself, G&S Pawn Shop, Harrison Properties, and a fully owned entity called Joe Rich. Rick Harrison took control of accounts in 2018 and distributions that Joanne Harrison said belonged to her under her husband's estate, including more than $500,000 in silver and more than $100,000 in cash that she said had never been properly accounted for. The lawsuit also alleged Rick had obtained an unexplained $3 million loan from Nevada State Bank using assets connected to Joanne's stake without her knowledge. Her monthly allowance of $25,000 was reportedly reduced to $20,000 in early 2020 and then ceased altogether that March, the same month the pandemic began, leaving her without pay for stretches across the following year and prompting her to file a temporary restraining order that described her as frightened and uncertain whether she could cover her own medical costs while her son lived comfortably off the businesses she said she still partly owned. Rick Harrison publicly denied the allegations and said his 81-year-old mother was being influenced by people around her with their own agendas. The battle played out in court at the exact same time the show was still airing, as if nothing had changed. What happened to the case after that was never made public. No verdict or settlement was ever even reported, and the case just evaporated from the news cycle as quietly as it arrived, leaving fans of the franchise with a legal cloud that technically never lifted. It just stopped being talked about. Years earlier, one of the show's most recognizable cast members had already tested how much controversy the production could absorb without consequence. In March of 2016, Las Vegas police served a warrant and searched the home of Austin Chumley Russell in connection with a sexual assault investigation involving another party, and found methamphetamine, marijuana, prescription anxiety medication, and a dozen weapons ranging from registered handguns to unregistered assault-style rifles. Austin Russell was never charged in the sexual assault case, but was booked on 19 counts of drug possession and one felony weapons charge, with bail set at $62,000. Months later, he took a plea deal, pleading guilty to a felony weapons charge and a gross misdemeanor count of attempted drug possession in exchange for 3 years of probation and counseling and completely avoiding jail time, with the felony charge set to be wiped from his record if he stayed clean until 2019. Production on the show barely missed a beat, and Austin Russell's role on Pawn Stars remained unaffected during the whole ordeal.
It's all legit. I stand behind everything I got.
Okay. So. Yeah, that's fine. I guess what it comes down to is price.
A call the network never fully explained to the public. Austin wasn't the only Harrison-adjacent cast member with a police record the show never acknowledged on camera. The son, Corey Harrison, had been working the counter since he was a kid. He was arrested on a DUI charge in September of 2023 when an officer saw his truck swerving into the bike lane on Main Street in downtown Las Vegas. Police said his eyes were bloodshot and watery, and that he smelled of alcohol, and pulled Corey out from behind the wheel of the same F-25. Oh, he'd been driving straight from the airport after flying back from filming Pawn Stars Do America in Minneapolis. The jail's breathalyzer wasn't working, so he agreed to have his blood drawn, but only after some hesitation. He was booked into Las Vegas City Jail on a DUI charge. Later, Corey gave reporters a colorful defense, blaming a poison ivy infection on his shin for his unsteady performance on the field sobriety test, and insisting he had only had one drink hours earlier on the flight. This wasn't his first run-in with the cops, either. Corey had one previous arrest in 2011, after an altercation at a bar in San Bernardino County, in which he allegedly pushed a deputy and a security guard before being released when he sobered up. Both incidents came and went without throwing off his spot on the show. Further proof that the Harrison name had a kind of institutional insulation that the cameras never had to reckon with. Between the active lawsuit regarding the company's ownership and a felony charge absorbed without consequence, the show's business and its cast were both carrying more risk than viewers ever saw reflected on screen. But it would be a family member, not a scandal, that would soon bring about the biggest change the show had ever seen. The exit that changed everything. Corey Harrison, or Big Hoss as viewers know him, started working at the pawn shop at 9 years old, decades before cameras ever came, and by the time the show was in its final seasons, he had become one of its most consistent and recognizable faces. That consistency ended the moment he moved to Tulum, Mexico, in September 2024, about 3 months after the show finished filming in June. Corey Harrison said that at the time he felt everyone on the show was acting a character, and he couldn't keep acting like a 41-year-old pretending to be 23 on camera. Corey Harrison, unlike his father, who he said would work until he literally could not work anymore, framed his decision as a deliberate preparation for a different kind of future, one that did not revolve around the pawn counter he had grown up behind. Tulum life gave him something the show never could, a type of fame without the act. Corey told the Review Journal he became friendly with the town's mayor, Diego Castañón Trejo, and local police would drop by once or twice a day just to check on him and take photos, a level of casual celebrity he said he never expected to find, hanging around cops and politicians in Mexico.
Go all the way up to 25,000 I've seen, and I figured leaving enough meat on the bones for you, I'd say 8,000.
He had not engaged in any contract renewal talks with history and had indicated that he had no intention of returning to Las Vegas, making the move seem less like a break from the show and more like a permanent departure from the persona it created around him. But on January 26, 2026, everything changed. A bad motorcycle accident in Tulum broke 11 of his ribs, punctured a lung, caused internal bleeding and a concussion, and required 3 separate life-saving surgeries and more than $100,000 in medical bills that a friend's fundraiser had to help pay. Rick Harrison had publicly stated that Corey Harrison's bills had already been paid, a fact that subtly complicated the fundraiser's own narrative and hinted at father and son friction that was never mentioned in any official statement. By the time History Channel confirmed a revival was coming, Corey Harrison would not be part of it, marking the first time in the show's entire history that it moved forward without him. His absence didn't just take away a cast member, but the built-in generational structure the franchise had used since 2009. A 3-generation family running one shop, now down to 2 men carrying a legacy that used to belong to 3. But Corey wasn't the first Harrison the show quietly lost, and the way it handled that first loss says just as much about what the cameras were willing to hide. The old man's secret decline. Richard Harrison, known to millions simply as the Old Man, had stopped showing up on the program regularly years before his passing in 2018, though almost no one outside his inner circle understood why at the time. He had been quietly fighting Parkinson's disease, a progressive neurological condition that had been kept largely out of the public eye throughout his decline, even as the show continued to air without him and offered audiences no real explanation for his diminishing screen time. Austin Russell later admitted that the cast had been informally prepping for the loss for a while, having spent a good deal of time at Richard Harrison's house in his final months, a private reality that was a stark contrast to the upbeat, joke-filled version of him still being packaged for television during that same period. Richard Harrison died on June 25, 2018, at age 77, and it was only in the hours after his death that Rick Harrison publicly attributed Parkinson's as the cause, putting to rest a mystery fans had speculated about for seasons without ever getting a straight answer. Richard Harrison co-owned the gold and silver pawn shop with his son from 1989, 2 decades before the cameras turned it into a worldwide brand, so his death didn't just end an emotional chapter of the show. It removed the one original cast member whose credibility as an actual pawnbroker, rather than a TV personality, had never been publicly questioned. His death also sparked the very feud that would later embroil the family in the courts, for it was his passing that sparked Joanne's claims to accounts and assets she said were never properly settled in the years that followed. Each subsequent cast departure, from Corey Harrison's exit to the final contract expiration, happened against a franchise that had lost its founding authority years ago and had continued to film as if that loss had made no difference. But long before any of that became public knowledge, Rick Harrison had already quietly begun building a way to keep the franchise alive no matter what happened to the people in front of the camera. The bubble Rick built to survive? Rick Harrison had been quietly working to future-proof the franchise long before the contract expired, and the most obvious evidence of that came in November of 2022 with the launch of Pawn Stars Do America, an 8-city spin-off that took Rick, Corey, and Austin Russell out of the shop altogether for the first time in the show's history. It was based on Antiques Roadshow, except that instead of appraising heirlooms for curious owners, the crew made real offers and turned those appraisals into cash right there. Austin Russell himself explained it, calling it the pavement in cities where fans could bring their own treasures and not wait for sellers to walk into a set in Las Vegas. This move mattered. It was more than a ratings play. After more than 600 episodes shot inside the same reconstructed shop, taking the show on the road for the first time was a sign that the franchise's future no longer depended on the authenticity of that one building, real or replica. It also gave Rick Harrison the chance to say publicly what the contract lapse would later prove true. The show couldn't just run on autopilot forever. In a retrospective interview on the hiatus, Harrison called the show's insulated world the bubble of gold and silver pawn, a phrase that summed up just how self-contained and repeatable the format had become, resilient enough that reruns alone could keep Big Hoss and Chumlee looking, in his words, like teenage versions of themselves forever. Harrison, however, immediately recognized the limitations of that bubble, saying a person has to prepare for the end, and that it would be foolish not to have done so himself. Harrison said the years before the pause had been rough, despite how much he had loved being on camera. Pawn Stars Do America took that ecosystem and expanded it into new markets, while the original series continued to air new seasons in its traditional home. But after 2 seasons and 25 episodes in that roadshow format, it was the flagship series whose contract quietly expired, proof that no amount of spin-off insulation could fully protect the original from the uncertainty closing in around it. Which meant when the network finally made its decision, it would come out of the gate looking nothing like the show that started it all. Pawn Stars 2.0. In December 2025, History Channel confirmed what fans feared and hoped in equal measure. New episodes were coming, with filming set to begin in early 2026 for a premiere in early 2027. But the roster would look drastically different than the one that built the franchise. The show's co-stars, Rick Harrison and Austin Russell, were confirmed to be going forward. But Corey Harrison, The son who had grown up inside that shop since childhood would not be part of it at all. It was the first time in the show's history that a Harrison other than Rick would be completely absent from a season. A symbolic break from the three-generation structure that had defined the series since its first episode. Corey said he found out about the revival of his own show the same way the public did. Asked about it during a phone call from Mexico, he told the Review Journal he had not heard about it, adding flatly that no one had told him anything. A detail that hinted the rift between father and son was deeper than either man had said on the record. Rick and Austin had already been testing out a version of life after the show, without Corey in the months leading up to the announcement, launching a podcast called Pawn After Dark in early 2025, recorded from the back of the actual gold and silver pawn shop and not formally affiliated with history, giving both men a running platform independent of the network long before any revival was confirmed. Corey, for his part, started his own podcast from Tulum that July, effectively mirroring his father's move from thousands of miles away and confirming that whatever relationship remained between them, it was no longer built around working the same counter. The revival also lacked the built-in mythology of the original seasons. No old man dispensing gruff wisdom behind the counter, no big hoss running the floor, just Rick Harrison and Austin Russell rebuilding a format that had quietly lost its founding cast one by one, carrying an unresolved family lawsuit, a felony charge absorbed without consequence, and a set that was never as real as it looked. The network was spending tens of millions of dollars on the bet that viewers would embrace a leaner, reshaped Pawn Stars built on what was left after everything else fell away. Do you think Corey will ever come back to Pawn Stars, or is his exit permanent? And did Rick Harrison do right by his own mother? Or is there more to that story that we don't know? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.